No, thank you so much for having me. And I've been in this country I came here at like 16, and so I just have a basketball team, which is unusual for an Indian guy to do. And so I just wanted to kind of share my story and talk about how I came here. And
We'd
talk
love
about
to.
Yeah, but I'm happy to answer questions. And but it's a privilege and an honor to meet all of you. So thank you for arranging this.
So Vivek, we all have read about Malcolm Gladwell, 60 Minutes, Venk Shukla.
Right. Thank you.
They've been, and we'd love to hear that story. I don't know if all of you saw that 60 Minutes with you talking about how
I'll share that.
Yeah, I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah.
That was phenomenal.
Yeah.
So great to have you here. And as charter members of Time Magazine, we are a startup, effectively.
That's great.
And I know how much Venk, so I've known Venk, and I've served on the global board myself.
That's
and Venk is a personal friend of yours? Or?
Yeah, well, I've been involved, like
Thai.
every few years they ask me to be like the keynote speaker at
Right.
the conference in California.
Yeah.
I think I do such a bad job that after that, then it takes a few years to forget how bad I was, and then they invite me again. So, yeah.
They spoke extremely highly of you coming, so we don't really have an agenda.
No, I just wanted to say hello and meet all of you, and
but we just love to hear your
and talk
story.
about my experiences, and
Yeah.
So I'll share my story.
Yes.
And so I grew up in Bombay, and when you get to be like an old guy, then you look back at your life and you start thinking, was there a point in your life that was kind of the pivotal moment for your life? That kind of defined who you were. So for me, that happened when I was a little boy. I was in Bombay, and it was the middle of the night. And I had my ear plastered to a little transistor radio. And I heard these magical words, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And so I was listening to the Voice of America broadcast the moon landing live all the way to Bombay. And those of you who are Mumbaikars, we still call it Bombay. So,
Right.
Yeah. But I was like, wow, who are these people who were able to take a man, put him in a box, and propel him 250,000 miles away to land on a rock, flawlessly. So I said, okay, I'm going to study science and engineering, and I'm going to somehow get to America, and I'm going to get serious about school. So I got serious about school, and IIT made a mistake, and they admitted me. But then IIT was way too hard, so I figured I needed to find a much easier school. So before my first year, I transferred to the much easier MIT in Boston.
Do you tell them that?
Yes. And then MIT was okay, but it was a little hard, so I said, okay, I need to find something easier. So I kept going dumber and dumber and dumber. So I started at IIT, then I went to MIT, and then I said, okay, you know what, I got a couple of degrees here. So I went to Harvard after that. So,
oh my God.
So I just got easier and easier and easier. And my big idea was that I was a hardware engineer, and I was frustrated with how software was done. And so I came up with this notion, why not do software like hardware is done? And I'm sure many of you are engineers, and so if you look at a computer, you take the top of a PC or peel off a chip, there's a backplane or a bus, and you plug different things into it. And so if you have a PC bus, you plug cards into it. So my big idea was to kind of emulate hardware and software, because the hardware always worked, it was always on budget, and the software just never got there. And so I said, I'm going to steal hardware ideas and apply them to software. And so I basically created a software bus, and using hardware ideas, it was real time, and instead of interrupts, I coined this thing called publish and subscribe. And so I kind of created that whole middleware category. I managed to talk my way into the office of this dead CEO of Goldman Sachs, and I was just like a young kid out of Harvard. And so he took pity on me, and he gave me my first contract. And this was in the 80s, and so he said, you know what, tell me how you're going to apply this bus and how you're going to apply it to my trading floor. And this is the same guy that later on, Bob Rubin, who became the Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton. And ironically, the guy who's the current Treasury Secretary, his dad was like my mentor, a guy called Bob Mnuchin. Was at, and he's probably turning in his grave right now to see what his son has done. But anyway, so I said okay. So I showed up the next day, and 85 Broad Street was the headquarters of Goldman Sachs, and I took the elevator to the top floor, and they would meet before the market opened, and so they met like at 7 in the morning, which is like 4 o'clock California time. So I'm like bleary-eyed. I show up for this meeting, and they had like a room where the partners who ran the firm all had breakfast every morning. And Bob invited me to come to this meeting and address the partnership of the firm. These were the guys who not just ran Goldman, but they ran Wall Street. They were like the legends of Wall Street. So I walk into the room and I sit down for breakfast, and I'm like this young guy, and I'm really nervous. Like these are the legends of Wall Street, and I'm like a punk. Like, what do I know? So anyway, so I'm sitting in the room, and so Bob looks at me and says, hey, tell my partners how you're going to apply technology and what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. And so I start talking, and as I talk, the door opens, and this guy walks in. And Bob Mnuchin, Steve's dad, was actually the old guy in the room, and you're sitting next to me, and he kind of waved him away. And so they said, go on. And so I started talking again, and then again, the door opened, and this guy walks in, and he waved him away. Third time it happened, he tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, son, you got to stop tapping your feet. So what happened is I was so nervous that I kept going like that with my feet. Right. And every time I did that, it would hit a switch under the carpet and summon the waiter. so then that was like my beginning as an entrepreneur. And well, luckily I survived that, and then I went on to automate Wall Street, sold that company to Reuters, and then my whole notion was that the trading floors of the 80s were a microcosm of what everything would look like. And so I convinced Reuters to license me back the technology, and I launched TIPCO, and that became a multi-billion-dollar software company. And then somewhere along the line, and my daughter's now like 25 or 26, and when she was 12, I was a single dad, and I was trying to find ways to spend more time with her. And so I foolishly volunteered to coach her basketball team. And this is Malcolm Gladwell's book. Yes. So he wrote a book about it. And so now understand, for those of you that are from here, that I grew up in Bombay playing cricket, and I had never actually touched a basketball in my life. And the guy, John Pay, who ran like the local basketball gym, the club teams, he felt bad for me. I was like a single dad, and I said, I need to spend more time with Anjali, my daughter. And he said, okay, I'll let you coach your team. So I show up to this giant gym in Redwood City, and there's all these basketball courts there, and it's called Pace Place. And I look around the room, and it's all these like 7-foot tall, ex-Division I, ex-Stanford, ex-Duke dads who are like coaching the other teams. Right. And then there's me. Okay? And so then I stood in front of the girls, and then I realized, now, of course, back then I didn't know what a draft was. So they'd had a draft, and the other dads picked all the best girls, and they gave me the girls that nobody else wanted. So it was like a motley crew of, it was like the Keystone Cops. And so I'm standing there, and I'm holding this basketball, and I have these girls in front of me, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I did this to get close to my daughter, and now I'm going to make a total fool of myself. And she's going to...
And she's a teenager then?
But she was 12.
Okay.
Pre-teen, which is worse. And so I'm gonna, like, this is going to backfire on me. But I didn't want to look like I didn't know what I was doing. So I looked at the girls and I said, girls, today we're going to run. And I made them run up and down the court for the whole hour. Just like run, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then I said, okay, I can't just keep making them run. At some point I got to play.
I'm trying to shoot them.
Yeah, exactly. But what I did is I went and I created a math equation for the game. I'm kind of a math nerd. And so I created a math equation for the game. And for those of you who are basketball fans or students or play, the essence of the equation was to win the turnover battle. And I wanted to win, and I defined the turnover as any time that you have the ball when they should. So it could be a charge, it could be an interception, it could be an offensive rebound. And so then the next practice I taught them the math equation, and they actually bought into it. And I ended up winning every single game and taking the team to the national championship. And yeah, and there were games where the other team, they were like, they were mad that I was doing this, and then they would say that I can't do that because I was doing a full court press the whole game long, and they would say, you got to call off the press, you're up 25-0. And there was one game where the coach of the other team was like this big, huge guy, and he got so mad at me that he told me that he wanted me to meet him in the parking lot after the game. And so my best friend at the time was a guy called Roger Craig, who was a legendary football player. So I went to meet the gentleman at the parking lot, but I smartly took Roger Craig with me. And it was fine.
Yeah.
But anyways, and so then a few years ago, my friend and neighbor Joe Laker was bidding on the Warriors, and he needed more money and needed to partner with somebody, and he said, look, I know you love basketball, because I fell in love with the game. So he asked me to join him, and so I became the vice chairman, you were the chairman, and then we got booed, and then finally we started winning. And just as we started winning, David Stern and the mayor of Sacramento reached out to me and said, will you save the team? Because Big Bad Steve Ballmer had bought the team and he was going to move it to Seattle. And my initial reaction was, look, I live in Silicon Valley, and the team is finally starting to win,
Right.
and we're starting to have fun. But I'm an immigrant to this country, as all of you are, or most of you are, and I felt that maybe this was something I was meant to do. I had gone to California with nothing, with no money, and everything I had I owed to the state of California. And so I thought, maybe I should do this. And so I ended up bidding against Ballmer, and in a highly publicized battle. And then part of the commitment I made was I had to give a personal guarantee to the NBA that I would build a new arena downtown. And that if I didn't by a certain date, then they would basically take the team back from me, and they could move the team. And that actually ended up helping me because it forced the state to pass a law just for us. It was Senate SB 743, Senate Bill 743, that allowed us to fast track the development. Now, understand that I built a house, and it took me like 5 years to build my house, and I had no idea how I was going to build an arena in 3 years. But we ended up building it in 2 years. It's considered the world's best arena. I invite all of you to come and see it. And I'm super excited about where the world is today. And I'll just talk briefly about how I see the future, and the evolving role of the Indian in America, and just kind of share my experiences on that, and then take questions. But we're entering what I think of as a new era. So I call it Civilization 3.0. Civilization 1.0 was the start of modern civilization, and it was driven by the agrarian revolution. Land was the raw material. It was the age of the artisan. People were farmers, shopkeepers, carpenters. And then with the Industrial Revolution, it was Civilization 2.0, where energy and steel were the raw materials, and it was really about efficiency. It was the age of the corporation. So we now live in a time where the world's largest bookseller has no bookstores, and the world's largest taxi company has no cars, and the world's largest hotel, Airbnb, owns no real estate. So it's really the age of information and data and service, and the raw materials are data and imagination.
Mm-hmm.
So when the world went from 1.0 to 2.0, there was a massive amount of disruption, and there's going to be even more disruption as the world moves from 2.0 to 3.0, and there's going to be trillions and trillions of dollars of new companies created. And one of the things I've done is I've launched an investment venture firm in partnership with just two investors, the University of California and myself. It's called BOW Capital, BOW. It stands for Better Our World. And I'm investing in about 10 companies every year that have a chance of becoming S&P 500 companies and having major disruptions.
Is this a venture fund?
It's a venture fund. It's kind of Series A is my sweet spot, but
Okay.
I do everything. And one of my agendas here is to to kind of develop ties with your community here. And if there's companies here that are looking, and my kind of playbook is that I can help companies reach escape velocity. And so you kind of get some traction, you do well, but then how do you get out of Earth's orbit and reach for the stars? And that's kind of where I come in, with not just with money, but with help and connections and everything else. And so I'm kind of the bow, the entrepreneur's the arrow. And for those of you who are parents, there's a beautiful Khalil Gibran poem in the Prophet that talks about how our children are the arrows and we're the bow. But just finally, just some thoughts on Indians in this country. And when I came here, it was kind of the dream of the Indian then was just to be an engineer at IBM or HP, right? And that was kind of the first generation of Indian immigrants.
A house with a dog.
What's that? Yeah, exactly.
A house and a dog and
house and a
two
dog.
or three kids.
And yes, and a job at like HP.
Right.
Right? And so then, they got more ambitious and they said, hey, we want to be like managers. And and back then they said like Indians, they couldn't really be managers. And they couldn't be in marketing because they were not articulate.
Right.
And so they were not polished and articulate enough to be in marketing. And so then the dream was that, hey, I want to go beyond that. I want to be a manager. I want to be in marketing. I'm smooth. I can dress well. I can talk. And that was kind of like the next barrier, right? And then after that, the next one was that, hey, you know what? I just want to start my own company. And I was probably like the first Indian that kind of did that, right? So I went through all these different barriers and saw this with my own eyes. And then it became, and unfortunately, it became that, yeah, you could start a company, but when it gets to be like a $20, $30 million company,
You gotta sell it off.
you gotta sell it off, or you gotta bring in like a real CEO. That Indian couldn't like run a multi-billion-dollar company. And now the largest companies in the world are run by, they're all friends of mine.
Right.
They're Indians, right? The CEO of Google, the CEO of Microsoft, the CEO of Adobe, the CEO of Indra Nui at Pepsi, and Ajay at MasterCard. But then, I think that the ultimate barrier was an Indian guy winning an NBA basketball team. And so
Baseball team is nice.
Yeah, so that was like the ultimate barrier. And like I went to, I was lucky when Obama invited me to go with him to India when he.
This past December?
No, when he went.
When
He was president, and he took like 5 or 6 of us with him.
Nice.
He had Indra, Ajay, Bob Iger from Disney. There were like 5 or 6. I was like the flunky in the group, but they were like big time CEOs and myself. And all Obama wants to do is be part of the basketball team.
Of course.
And so he had me sitting with him the whole time because he's a big hoops fan.
Yeah.
And then when he was in the Bay Area, he asked me to play golf with him just a few weeks ago. And but what's happened is that we're using basketball as a agent of good. And so when I bought the team, I kind of had a vision that I call NBA 3.0. And part of it was that we want to use this as a platform for doing good all over the world and also in our community. And we've had we had the situation happen where in the city of Sacramento, we've completely changed the economy. So there's billions of dollars of economic activity. It went from being kind of a city on the decline to becoming the fastest growing city in the state. It's become one of the top 3 destinations for millennials now. And the whole downtown is just thriving. But we had this very unfortunate situation where there was an African-American kid, 22 years old, living at his grandma's house. And he was, they were chasing him. He was in his backyard. And they shot him like, 20 times, I think 10 times in his back. And they said he had a gun, and he didn't. All he had was an iPhone. And so then a week or 2 after that, we were playing one of our last games, and we were playing the Atlanta Hawks. And the owner of the Hawks, I have like my own room at the arena, and I was hosting a dinner with him and also with the dean of UC Davis, who's also an African American gentleman. And so the three of us were having dinner back there, and then all of a sudden they summoned me and said that, you know, the protesters had barricaded the arena, and we had about 3,000 fans inside, and then about 14,000 were waiting to get in, and the police were petrified they were inside, and then the players said, hey, we kind of are sympathetic with the protesters. This kid just died, we can't just play. And then the NBA calls us up and says, no, you got to play. So I said, hey, can I go talk to the protesters? And they said, no, you can't do that. So anyway, so I went to the players, and at that time we had a legendary player. This was last year, who played for us, a guy called Vince Carter, who's kind of a legend, and he's an older guy, a veteran. Mm-hmm. And Vince said, okay, look, we'll play on one condition, that after the game, you go out to the court and you say a few words, and we'll stand with you. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, so what happened is that we ended up playing, and then even though they wouldn't let me go outside, I sent somebody to summon the head of the protesters. And then later on, the next day, he said in the paper that he thought I was going to put him in handcuffs, and instead I sat him down, shook his hand, and I said, hey, enjoy the game, and let's talk. Tell me what you're thinking. And then after the game, I said a few words and I gave a talk, and it's on YouTube, and it went like viral because I was the first sports team owner who actually acknowledged the injustice and the pain of the African American community, and then we became the first business in the United States to form a partnership with Black Lives Matter.
As typical.
No, I'm talking about the Kings.
Okay.
Kings.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so we're doing a lot of good in the community. So anyway, so in my mind, for Indians everywhere,
right.
We have been given amazing opportunities in this country, but I also want us to embrace the challenge of, we've had people speak out for us, and we need to do the same for other people.
True.
We need to do the same for African Americans, for Latinos, for the LGBTQ community, and all those who, have been put down. And so we've, kind of taken that challenge, and we try to give voice to those who don't have a voice, and we try to support and do good in our community. So anyway, I'll stop talking and see if there's any questions. But it's a
I think
great
you're
pleasure.
using, whatever you've embraced, you've used it very effectively as a platform.
Thank you.
So your fund is very appropriately made.
Yeah, and I would love to have an ongoing dialogue. The one other thing I'll tell you, and you have to promise to keep it confidential because we haven't.
Let me stop this.
You can tape it, but don't tweet it.
That's fine.
You can just pause it.
Yeah. But we're going to be the.
If you can put together an investment team, you can have a franchise. A couple of groups tried, and it didn't come together. Then local theatrical producer, a fellow named Zeb Buffett, was very close with Carnival Cruise Line founder Ted Arison. Went to Ted because he figured he had the money, and he made this long, and this is Zeb telling me the story, long, elaborate pitch about how wonderful this would be for the community, all of the good things about it. And he said he finished his pitch, and he said, Ted looked at him and said, Zeb, what's basketball? He had no idea. He'd never seen the game. He didn't know what it was. But Zeb was persuasive, and Ted wrote the check. And now it was just how the mind.
By the way, it was a great investment, so it's probably the best investment he ever made. So.
Right.
No, it's true. Like, I'm very bullish on it, and I think it's in a great spot. And I think the league has done a fantastic job. This is why I say America is amazing. Like earlier today, I had a call with our competition committee, and so how does a boy who grew up in Bombay playing cricket end up sitting on the competition committee with Michael Jordan and Chris Paul and Brad Stevens, and so I'm here on the competition committee. I never played basketball, but we keep evolving the game. We have the 14-second shot clock now that keeps the pace going on an offensive rebound, and so I think the game is, it's like I like to say that, hey, in 20 years, will I still be using my iPhone? I don't know, but will I still be watching NBA basketball? For sure.
A lot of data analytics in the game now.
Yeah,
Right,
huge
that's-
amount of data. So every arena and most practice facilities, they have 6 overhead cameras, and they digitize all the data, and so you get 3D data, you get position data, and you get so basically like our head of analytics is a Harvard professor, a PhD in machine learning.
Right,
Wow.
AI.
Yeah, AI. So there's tens of gigabytes of data that you're looking at. So it's gotten a lot of math involved.
We could segue out in your, because you're involved in so many things, as you see the future, what do you see as 2 or 3 areas in technology that you that you see a lot
Yeah.
of potential in?
So what I'm seeing right now is there's going to be there's 2 types of things happening. One is there's new $1 trillion industries emerging, and the second is there's going to be massive disruptions to many of the existing industries. So I'll give you examples of both. So out of Berkeley and MIT, they're fighting over it, there's a technology called CRISPR-Cas9. And so with CRISPR-Cas9, you can edit genes. And so you'll be able to eliminate genetic disorders like muscular dystrophy. So literally, you'll be able to get an injection in your thigh muscle, and the muscular dystrophy will be gone. It'll cut out that gene. And so this is going to be a $1 trillion industry. You're going to be able to create new life forms. You're going to say, I want to create a peanut that doesn't have allergies. So that's one example. The second one is, it's kind of interesting, right? The universe is 14 billion years old, and Earth is 4.5 billion years old. And then, 500 million after the Earth, there was bacteria. And so now it turns out that, like when I was a kid growing up, whatever happened to me, if I had a cough, anything I had, my grandma would say, it's your stomach. Well, it turns out that grandma was right.
True.
And so basically now they believe, so another $1 trillion industry is microbiome. Okay? So people are going to figure out that your gut bacteria controls everything and might even be the cause of things like autism. And so, so I invested in, one gene editing company, and, this CRISPR-Cas9 is going to be huge. Microbiome, there was, because of antibiotics, C-sections, and not breastfeeding, a huge swath of the population doesn't have a certain bacteria that leads to runs as a baby, but then it leads to autoimmune and diabetes and all kinds of later disorders. So these people isolated it, made it into a probiotic. But anyway, the whole probiotic area, it's going to be a $1 trillion industry. There's going to be, obviously, people are going to live longer.
Longevity.
Yeah, so aging
companies.
Companies that address aging populations, give them a better quality of life, just things for aging. That's going to be a $1 trillion industry. Then there's going to be, like shipping and logistics. So if the world keeps getting Amazoned at the pace at which it's getting Amazoned, then we don't have enough roads for you guys to buy everything you buy. And so the focus is shifting from the malls, to experience centers. And so what I did in downtown Sacramento is, in the old days you built cathedrals, and the old days you gathered around a communal fireplace. Then it was a cathedral and a town square. And so I think of my arena as kind of the global, cathedral or the communal fireplace. But as you shift away from stores, then shipping and logistics is going to be
warehousing.
It's going to be a trillion, and warehousing. That's going to be a $1 trillion industry. Obviously, machine learning. Like as a kind of a computer guy, I still am personally in awe of what machine learning can do. And it's not just brute force. And so 15, 20 years ago, there isn't a computer scientist on the planet that could have predicted that you could have a self-driving car, And even the name, driverless car,
right.
Like when cars first came, we called them horseless carriages, and now we call them driverless cars. And so your grandkids will never drive. But what machine learning can do is truly, to me, is like mind-boggling. We've reached a point of exponential evolution with that. And just to put that in context, you should say, okay, what is the largest number I can think of? And obviously, it's not grains of sand, it's not, stars, it's atoms. So how many atoms are there in the entire universe? So there's 10 raised to 70 atoms in the entire universe. But there's 10 raised to 170 possible combinations in the game of Go. Okay? And now the computer program is beating all the Go champions like a drum. So it's not just brute force.
Right.
And so we're seeing companies where they do a better, faster, cheaper job of reading, like X-ray and other kinds of imaging data. And so we're going to get to a point where most medical diagnosis will be
Dislocated. Yeah.
will be. So there's all these trillions of dollars disrupt, kind of new sectors that didn't exist, and then there's disruption to existing sectors that's happening. And if you think about 15, 20 years ago, like 15 years ago, you would go and pull up at a gas station to get a map. You don't do that now. You would fumble for quarters to make a call. You don't do that now. You would wait at Blockbuster on a Friday evening to pick up a movie, and nobody, like our kids don't even know what a Blockbuster is, right? And when you were coming to Miami, you would say, "Oh, I have to remember to bring my camera," and you don't do that. One of the people that I had formed a relationship with, and he passed away, was Steve Jobs. And Steve actually went to India before he kind of got his...
Right. He was in a
and
flight yoga to
yeah, and so I'll tell you guys a Steve story because of his Indian connection. But he was, obviously, he created Apple, and then he got booted out of Apple. And he kind of was humbled by that. So he started a new company called Next, and it made a computer. It was like a black box. I don't know if any of you saw it. And at the time, my first company, I was automating trading floors, and I was selling billions and billions of dollars worth of Sun workstations to banks. And so Steve called me up and said, "Hey, I want you to use Next instead of Sun." And I said, "Okay, let's talk." So he said, "Okay, I'll come. I just had a sinus surgery, but I'll be there tomorrow at noon." And so a lot of people said, "Oh, he's not going to show up." And that was like the first time I ever met him. And so he showed up right on the dot of 12. And so then I went to my office, and I sat in my office chair, and he sat on the floor, cross-legged.
Indian style.
And I said, "Steve, what are you doing?" And because even then he was a legend. I was like, "Steve, sit in the chair." And he did like a namaste. He sat on the cross-legged right at my feet, namaste. And he said, "Vivek, you're the master of selling to banks. I want to learn from you." Okay, after that he owned me, basically. So he could charm anybody, and he could get anything he wanted from anybody. Now he could also be the other way,
Right.
because after that I would have lunch with him every week, and we would eat at this place called El Fornayo in Palo Alto. And even back then he barely ate, so he was kind of a vegan even then. And he didn't like the just how responsive the waitress was, and he just went at her. And I was puzzled because he's always been super nice to me, but then he was just like really nasty to her. But then as I got to know him, he just had this really high bar.
Expectation.
Yeah, and if anyone didn't meet that bar, he just let them have it. But he also knew that whenever he wanted, he could charm anyone. So you could be that way because you could just turn on a dime and be like the most charming guy in the world. But I always was a huge fan of his, and I spoke to him a few months before he passed away. And he just was a guy that had a really high bar.
And I have two questions.
Yes, sir.
One is this NBA right now, like the bigger players getting together and moving to one location. How do you think in the long term it will impact NBA? Or will it turn into like a baseball where 6 teams are great, the other 24 teams are just living off of the 6 teams?
Yeah.
And the second question would be, how is Michael Jordan in person? You must have interacted with him a lot. So I just wanted to see how.
Yeah, so he's a really great guy. He's an amazing guy. He's. I apologize.
Wonderful to meet you.
Thanks. He is. I don't care who you are. When you're with him, you're still in awe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's. One of the things is, he's. many of these guys are very, very smart. And I don't think people realize how charming and how smart these guys are. And like one of the guys I'm close to is Shaq, who I made a partner in both my fund and also in the Kings. And again, these guys have very high IQs. And so you look at, this is a game for the gods, by the way. These are like guys that are like 7 feet tall, have like 3% body fat. They fly in the air, and they're not even human. But they are, like, many of them are very smart and very charming guys. And well, in terms of the super teams, obviously that is a concern. And there's another committee that I sit on called the Planning Committee, which kind of decides the revenue share. And we've got like this repeater tax, which is quite punitive. But in a place like the Bay Area, it doesn't matter. There's so much money that they can sell tickets, they can sell naming rights, and they can keep paying it. But we don't have an answer. We don't have an answer to that. But there's a lot of luck involved as well.
Yeah.
Because I was there with the Warriors, and
Right.
there's nobody who could have imagined that Steph Curry would be Steph Curry.
Yeah.
And that so there's kind of luck involved, and some of the injuries turned out to be lucky as well, because he was hurt. They were able to. I was there. We were able to give him a low price contract because he was injured, and then because we had more money, we were able to go. At that time, they were able to go get Iguodala, and then David Lee got hurt, but then Draymond Green got to play. So there's and look, there's 30 guys, and it's kind of the ultimate club, and they all are very, very smart. I'm like the dumbest one, and they all have great staffs, it's like no other experience. It's a whole different experience than anything that I could ever have imagined.
So you said you're here in Miami
Yeah.
because you're thinking about capital and some of the opportunities. What do you see here in Miami in terms of opportunities?
Yeah, so this is, this place should be a tech hub, because you have a lot of young immigrants, and you have people coming here from all over the world. It's become a highly desirable location, and obviously you're heavily dependent on certain industries, but I think that my message is, look, we're heading into kind of a new era, and like, gentlemen, start your engines. Everybody, like, the Bay Area has an advantage, but the Bay Area has become so congested and so expensive that there has to be innovation in companies coming from other areas.
I mean, you mentioned a couple, industries that represent trillion-dollar opportunities. Trade and logistics, as an example,
Yeah.
is off the scale here
Exactly.
versus most places, which is
Yeah.
really encouraging to
Yeah.
us as a team. I, in addition to being involved with TIE, I represent the Economic Development Organization here in Miami-Dade. So we are very interested in the...
Yeah, so I would love to, and I'll have my team come here and share, kind of technologies and things we're seeing. I'd also love to form a partnership with your local universities.
Sure.
And, I would be willing to have, sponsor hackathons and startup contests, and have,
We were just
We were
talking
just
about
talking
that.
about
We were going to actually put a proposal to you.
yeah, no, I would love to do that.
We're planning.
Thai Miami is actually trying to get this, so,
Yeah.
building on what Mike's saying, what I'm noticing here, and I'm 4 years into Miami, and obviously
Yeah.
a few of us have stayed longer, but there are these little silos, so Thai Miami is trying to be the catalyst in creating a South Florida entrepreneurship ecosystem
Right.
with Mike's help, and Mike and I go back, we were together in Michigan, starting Michigan for Thai.
Right.
So if we can, coalesce all these forces.
Yeah, and there's, there's a few things where all the companies are coming out of right now. And so one is like the hottest incubators. Now, for some reason, it's ended up in the Bay Area. It's called Y Combinator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I have a son who is embedded there, and he makes, he gets like the rookie deal, and then when those companies are successful, I get the free agency deal, and so I pay up. And but then there's all these communities, and the Asian and the Indian communities are very rich communities.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good thing to kind of leverage the Thai and the Indian community. And then, obviously the universities, and some of them have a longer track record of doing it. But believe it or not, like I was, at the Harvard, my Harvard reunion a couple of weeks ago, and they haven't cracked the code on it at all.
Right.
Even MIT, where I got a couple of degrees, have not cracked the code on it. And so I think that you almost have to kind of be a little, adventurous and make it really easy for people. And so, I'd love to work with the local universities and sponsor hackathons and sponsor startup contests and have like an ongoing relationship.
And we have great relationships with the universities throughout the entire South Florida region.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah, we could even do like a, like a set of contests around that.
Three-county area,
Yeah.
Yeah.
covering the
Yeah,
whole
and we just have a
county.
hackathon.
Yeah, we
And
were actually
so-
proposing to, in addition to a hackathon, even have an innovation challenge.
Yeah.
So we've done that for Facebook and Bridgestone in India.
Yeah, right.
We'd like to welcome TIPCO and your other
Yeah.
organizations
Yeah.
to consider a hackathon.
Yeah, and my fund, Bo, would love to be a part of it and
There you
sponsor
go,
it.
that'd be great,
And I'd sponsor a hackathon or a startup contest
yeah.
or innovation. But I love your notion that, like one of the industries of the future is shipping, logistics, warehousing. And so you guys should become the center
Excellence.
of excellence.
Absolutely.
That should be a core competency
Absolutely,
that you leverage,
absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
And so that would be a great one to do. But there might be others related to that, like, just autonomous and driverless.
And that's actually.
Like I was asking Mickey, right? I said, hey, Mickey, so how far away are autonomous ships? And, so there should be people that are dreaming big over here.
Pittsburgh has become the autonomous car center because of Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
really amazing
Yeah,
what they're doing.
yeah, but the company, and my son was an investor in the company that drove autonomous, was a company called Cruise,
Right.
that came out of Y Combinator, that GM, just paid $1 billion for. And that company, they've kept it separate, and it could end up being worth more than GM.
Right.
Because, and they're ahead of Tesla and all the other guys.
Mhm.
And so there's going to be this massive disruptions, and like who would have thought that, that Detroit would end up being
Right.
like the Rust Belt, right? And so you just have to get ahead of the curve and, be willing to
Okay.
be a little outrageous.
Yeah. By the way, just as a little anecdote, I put together the bond deal that built this little stadium in Detroit for the Detroit Red Wings, the hockey
that's
arena
awesome.
and the basketball arena.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, I worked for Michigan's Governor Rick Snyder before
Okay.
coming here.
That's great.
So,
Yeah.
it is
Well,
fun.
I'm
it's
a big
fun building
believer that,
stadiums.
because I took some funding from from the city, which, I'm paying back with interest, but it's been a win-win situation, like I've been able to create thousands of jobs and completely transform the economy, and really, it goes back to Roman times. We had Coliseums thousands of years ago,
Right.
and so this is the modern Coliseum. And it is kind of what you need for a great city. I told Prime Minister Modi that you need a 21st century Coliseum.
It's interesting you say there's nothing in India. I would have expected.
Not a
there would be
single
some.
arena.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Cricket stadiums, but not cricket stadiums.
So one of the things that we did for you, SEMA gave us a few days' notice that you were going to come.
Well, I apologize.
And so you really are an honored guest for us here. We really appreciate everything that you do. And I mean, other than the Miami Heat and Sacramento competition, we love everything about you. We built you a website.
Well, I can be your second favorite team.
No problems there.
I like in India, when I go there, I'm like, hey, I don't want to be like the number one sport. I just want to be number 2. I know that I'm never going to displace cricket.
Well,
So.
I can assure you, I'll be personally rooting for your team going forward, just because I met you. But we built you a website. So we put together just a comprehensive overview of Miami.
Wow.
So it includes talent, business, climate, education, transit and mobility, quality of living.
That's a great idea.
Key
Thank you.
industries. So we built you a website, and I'd be happy to give you, it's password protected, so that way There's not going to be a bunch of junk and people in there, so
That's
we
awesome.
built it out for you. And I'd be happy to give you the URL and
Well,
the
that's awesome.
password to
Thank
it,
you.
so that you can learn more about Miami at your leisure and also give us some feedback.
You know, what I'd love to do though is add my Bow Capital button on
Be
it.
happy to.
And so what would be my dream scenario is if I can have a button that anybody who has an idea for a company and has gotten some traction, and so I just want to remove all friction for people who are entrepreneurs. And by the way, you know, we did something recently that we, you know, could have, you know, it's completely non-partisan, but it could have an impact on the election. And so, you know, my life's work has been removing friction from everything, right? But the fact is that there's a lot of friction in terms of registration and voting. And so I launched this initiative called Rally the Vote, and we teamed up with the company, and we launched it on National Voter Registration Day, where we embed it in the app, and it becomes really, you know, just like ordering an Uber. It's that easy to register. And what I'm really proud of is, you know, like every person I call instantly joined the, you know, the initiative. So the first call I made was to Jeannie Buss, the Lakers, and I said, hey Jeannie, you know, will you join me? And she said, of course. And it's non-partisan. It's just like make it easy for people to register. You know, then I called up the, you know, Larry Bear at the San Francisco Giants baseball team, and he said yes. And then I called, you know, Jed York at the Niners. He said yes. You know, I called Michael Reinsdorf, you know, the Bulls. So it's like every team I called, they said yes. And it's touched. Joel, it's had like 1 billion people that it's touched worldwide already.
Wow, 1 billion people?
Yeah, so all over the world people have seen it, and so, you know, it could move the needle in terms of registration. But we have a huge platform in sports.
Yeah.
And, you know, so similarly, I want to reduce the friction for
Absolutely.
entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
Speaking of friction, Vivek, you know, it's sadly noted that Silicon Valley is a tool for investing in women businesses. And I'm actually launching a fund for that. Is that something that your group is looking or would consider looking? Specifically, so my fund is going to be targeting women.
Absolutely. So you
businesses.
should, you know, I've invested in women, obviously, and, you know, at the Kings, I think 3 of our top 5 people are women. So, including Joel. And so,
Looks like we haven't figured out how to get the sun out of your eyes.
Well, we can keep the lights on, but we were hoping to.
No, agreed.
yeah.
There's a
Let me see
big,
if there's someone else that can.
No, don't worry. Yeah,
I
it's fine.
apologize.
yeah, the curtains.
But no, you know, we think, you know, I think that women are actually, for the future, women are better leaders.
I
Because-
agree.
Yeah. No, I'm not just saying this to schmooze you. I really believe this because, you know, the kind of the industrial era style of leadership was kind of a Sousa marching band style. It was a top-down, hierarchical, you know, very dictatorial style. And so as we go to kind of the digital era and the
And
new
your
company,
3.0.
my 3.0, there's leadership 3.0 is like if 2.0 was a Sousa marching band, then 3.0 is a jazz band.
Right.
And basically it's a networked consensus empathy model, which is more naturally suited to women. And by the way, I think that's one of the reasons why you have so many Indian CEOs, because they tend to be more kind of empathetic, and they're not kind of the old school, like, you know, I'll issue the orders, everybody else will listen. It's more about listening than issuing orders.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So we had Mahatma Gandhi's grandson here a few weeks ago,
Right.
and he spoke at a local university about something I never knew before was the civil rights movement was really like a lot of people from like Howard University, a lot of like African American university presidents went to India in the 1940s, even before anyone knew who Martin Luther King was,
Right.
Jr. So it's like, it almost seems like you're coming full circle. I was wondering if you could speak to that about the connection between India and the African American community. And the second question is, you mentioned Shaq.
Right.
So now Shaq is like the spokesperson for one of our big startups here in Miami, Magic Leap, who does the AR, VR with the NBA. If you could talk about how you might be using Magic Leap in the stadiums coming up.
Yeah.
And I'm also a Y Combinator CEO as well, a former
Okay.
at least.
Okay. Well, obviously, Magic Leap is is huge. There's been tons of money invested in it,
Press the button.
and everyone's very excited about Magic
You
Leap.
need to know which buttons to press.
And that's an example of a company that, like it's in Miami, which is amazing, right?
Yeah.
So.
Have you got to try out the product, and what do you think?
I think it's like mind blowing. It's a complete game changer. But there should be a whole cottage industry around that.
Yeah. So you mentioned you have like 3D data in your stadiums. Like, would
Yeah.
you be using that with the headsets, or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We'd love to be the first. We've been the first at many things. So we have this amazing arena, which is an indoor-outdoor arena. So when I started building the arena, and I'm going to like brag a little bit about it because we're so proud of the arena. We had I had a competition for the world's best architects, and then they literally spent over $1 million just competing to get the job because it was a prize job to get. And I just said it has to be iconic, it has to be iconic. And they were like, what is that? I said, I'll know it when I see it. And so then finally I said, look, if you want me to tell this is if you do this with your hands, then that's the Transamerica Pyramid. Everyone knows that's iconic. If you do this with your fingers, then that's the Sydney Opera House. It's iconic. So now if you do this with your hands, that's our arena because it's an indoor-outdoor arena. So you push a button, doors go up. It's also 100% solar powered, and so it gets it's completely driven by renewable energy. It's the first arena in the world that got a LEED Platinum rating, and we flipped the whole paradigm on its head. So instead of you checking into the arena checks into you, and you can sit at home and you can have remote control, to watch TV. So the phone becomes the remote control for the arena. You can get food, you can adjust the temperature, you can get data.
You haven't seen it, I'm looking at it right now, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, in my mind, given the platform and the opportunity we have, and I'm really proud of our league that Adam Silver has been on the right side of history, issue after issue after issue. And again, for me, I feel like we Indians have to stand up and speak out.
So how would you actually? I mean, the NBA was very upfront. It was first into VR. Like, how would you actually picture sports or NBA 3.0 using like a company like Magic Leap or this new technology, or even big data, like you're talking about before, like on a practical level, on a day-to-day level for your fans and for your coaches, players?
Yeah, well, for coaches and players, it's obvious. So it's no secret that was it the Philadelphia or one of the quarterbacks? The main guy got hurt and he had to fill in, and using VR, he learned the plays very quickly. And so having a facility to learn plays, and so using VR AR for that is a given. But also in terms of fans, one of the things is that we own a 2K team, and one of the reasons to do that is besides the fact that esports are going through the roof, is that you can actually learn a lot from esports, and they tend to be very interactive, and so there's a lot of data, there's a lot of interactivity, and fans have just a infinite appetite for data and for participation. So with VR AR, and we'd love to, our guys, with the most technically advanced. I think we were rated the most technically advanced business in sports, not just team but business, and so we would be early consumers of that. And so Joel, we should have our Ryan and our team look at, we should be the first adopters of Magic Leap and see how we can use it. It's pretty mind blowing what you can do with it. You can also have fans be able to look at things in any language with any kind of augmentation.
Be immersive too, see what they would do in a given situation.
Yeah, and that's what create the interactivity, right? And then when you think about kind of what's on the horizon with sports betting, that just opens up a whole new avenue of marrying all these things together.
Yeah, it's a good point. I guess Unicorn just got approval for their first crypto sports betting, but I mean, you mentioned the esports, which is interesting with the VR, because that's an area where VR hasn't taken off in esports, and it's always like the practical versus the theory. So it's almost you're the forefront of that. Everything's in theory can be done, but in reality, the consumers didn't want VR in esports.
Yeah, but we can do some very, very simple things for our fans
Yeah.
that would get them even more engaged and have more interactivity and data at the same time.
So Vivek, would you consider coming back to Miami?
I would love to.
February, you'll be the first one we're inviting.
I would love
We
to. So
are-
Joel runs my schedule. Yeah.
Joel, we are planning to have an entrepreneurship summit for South Florida, and we'd love for Vivek to be the keynote speaker. And we'll of course be in touch with you to extend that invitation. But,
Well, congrats on what you guys are doing.
thank you. No, this was great.
Vivek, before you wind up, I have 2 questions. Start with an observation. So you went from writing software for machines to writing software for humans. That leads me to my first question. If we live forever, and if machines are going to do all the work, then what are humans going to do?
Yeah, it's interesting because the few days that I spent with President Obama in India, he and I talked about this extensively, and I said, look, Mr. President, there's not a problem you're going to have, but a future president is going to have this problem that we might be at the end of the chain on this, because there was always things we could do better, and so I think things like VR and AR are coming at the right time, because in a way it's kind of back to the future, and so the artisan becomes more important again. So the arts become more important, and so the ability to create things becomes more important. And so I think the future actually goes from the left brain back to the right brain, where just being creative becomes more important. I think values become important, and so people will have values, and just having those values. So I think that there will be a period of dislocation, and we're seeing that played out in the political theater right now, where there's income inequality, and Silicon Valley has sucked up the world economy. There used to be thousands of taxi companies, now there's one. There used to be thousands of bookstores, now there's one. There used to be thousands of hotels, and now Airbnb. So we're kind of sucking up the world economy through technology, and that's going to cause dislocation. And so it's going to be a challenging transition, and I think that's a question that and this is debated, because I have friends like Mark Andreessen who believe that we're just going to move on to the next thing, and then I have other people, including myself, who's not so sure that I think we need to like our kind of the whole American value system is based on the Protestant work ethic, and so it's all based on laboring in the fields and working in the factories and all of that. And so so where do we go from here? And I think those are important questions, and I don't have the answers, but I think that I'm fundamentally optimistic that the world is going to be a lot better.
Leads to my second question. So you said something very interesting, that when you were a kid, you were listening to a radio, and that led you on the career path you're on. So if you are a kid again, what path would you take?
Yeah, I think that this is actually a fantastic time to be a kid, because anything is possible, and I think that ironically, I think developing the right brain is just as important. Like when we were kids, it was all about the left brain, right? And I like to say that ironically, the guy with the right brain beat the guy with the left brain, and the guy with the right brain was Steve Jobs, and Apple became more valuable than Microsoft. And so I would say, just get a really well-rounded education, and just developing kind of the right brain stuff is like I was, I was really upset because my daughter, she went to Berkeley, she studied marine biology, and I was like, well, how does she ever get a job, being a marine biologist? And then she became a singer. And I'm like, wait, but it might be that she's actually smarter than me, because there'll always be a demand for somebody who can, well, she says, here's the thing, that music, it appeals to your emotions without your consent.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I thought that was kind of powerful. I couldn't argue with that.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that we just have to encourage our kids to, just to think both sides. And as Indians, we have a tendency to be really left-brain focused.
So that's interesting, because President Obama spent a huge chunk of his years emphasizing STEM education.
Yeah.
And it was, I forget who was the champion of liberal education, which is where traditional universities.
There's very few people. Even Bill Gates, he's made fun out of a liberal education.
Right. And yet in India, I don't know if you're aware of Ashoka University,
Yeah.
which has been set up with the donations of a bunch of NRS from US,
Yeah.
which is trying to be the leading liberal arts university in India. So
Yeah, so I'm a contrarian. I believe that even though I have left-brain education, and,
Right.
I'm a math guy, I'm an engineer, I'm an MBA, I think that Indians need more right brain as well.
Right.
Because I think that,
The problem with that would be, as you said, right? It's economy 3.0.
yeah.
And when economy 3.0 hits, it's very, very heavily focused on STEM, because that.
But I'll just be a contrarian. That's what everyone says. So I'll give you the contrarian point of view. That basically everything that can be done by a computer will be done by a computer, including writing code, or it'll be done in India. And so then who will rule? It'll be the guys, the content creators.
But isn't the value of Silicon Valley because of innovation and not the work? Whoever drives the innovation for next generation is going to dominate the economy.
Well, you need it all, so it comes from different sectors. But Steve Jobs was not an engineer. He was more of an artist. And he studied for 1 year, and he studied calligraphy. And that's why you see his fonts are beautiful.
Yeah.
And so I would just be a contrarian and say, look, the guys who are creating the songs and writing the plays and creating, the entertainment sector is going to be, you said, what are people going to do? And a lot of it, I'll name industries that didn't exist. So programming, content, and applications for Magic Leap, for VR, AR. That's going to be gigantic. And so basically, at the end of the day, you still need to create something of value with all these technologies. And so, I'm a left-brain guy, but I'm passionate. Like, I really believe in supporting the arts. We have a beautiful Jeff Koons sculpture outside our arena, and it's like completely transformed Sacramento. And so, I'm a passionate believer of an arts education as well.
One mundane question. You invested in a lot of early stage growth companies, and you sold and bought. I'm an entrepreneur. I've sold a couple companies, but in the private deals. Is taking a company public the ultimate arbiter of price discovery in your mind? Is that if you had to do it instead of trying to sell it midway or to a group of investors or a merger, taking it public, is that the best price discovery for an entrepreneur first idea?
Yeah, I think there's more than that, and now we're living in an environment, and this is a longer discussion. We're living in an environment where, because of activist investors and just just a variety of factors, it's become harder to be a public company.
Right.
But there's many benefits to being a public company. You get tens of millions of free marketing
Right.
every year. Tens of millions of dollars, because everyone knows who you are. You're on the exchange. Everyone knows your stock. Everyone knows, and obviously your employees get liquidity, and so there's that. You obviously have the ability to to raise more capital. So there's a lot of benefits, but then also there's a downside that, you have to be driven by short-term goals.
Quarterly goals.
Quarterly goals.
So the multiples seem to be higher in a, if you're successful, obviously, then
Yeah.
seem to be higher in a,
Yeah.
public
Yeah.
market than.
Yeah, and I think the key is to just make sure that you figure out what metrics you want to be measured on, and then make sure that you ace all those metrics. And those metrics can be like Amazon didn't make money.
Right.
And Salesforce still doesn't make money.
Clicks. Right?
Yeah. So.
That's it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having us. We're gonna head to the game.
Could we get a photo before you
Of
leave?
course. Yeah.